Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to join us for this session. This is Fang, and I am so grateful and honored today to be able to bring together Jewel, who I had the pleasure of meeting earlier this year, alongside Justin Kahn, who is a friend and co-founder of Twitch, to talk about the different methods that they have cultivated in their own lives to feel good regardless of external circumstances. Given how tough this year has been for so many people, we really hope that apart from just inspiration from the speakers' own lives, that you're able to also take this session as a launching pad to help cultivate your own skill set and tools for learning how to deal with the ups and downs of life, coming from a sense of equanimity. So with that, I'm going to do quick intros on both speakers, and then we'll jump into questions. I think Jewel at this point probably needs very little introduction. Obviously, she's a super talented singer, songwriter, musician, actress with 4 Grammy Award nominations. As for Justin, he is best known as the co-founder of Twitch, which is now the 32nd most popular website in the entire world. But how all this got started, though, was in 2006, he basically strapped a camera to his head and decided to live stream his life to the world 24/7. While it sounds crazy, they actually sold the company to Amazon 8 years later for $970 million, which is to say that maybe if you have a wild dream, it's worth pursuing. Apart from being an entrepreneur and angel investor, though, Justin has also spent a lot of time thinking about what does it take to feel good, regardless of external circumstances. And he's got a great article by the same name on Medium called Feeling Good, which I highly recommend checking out if you haven't. With that, I want to turn this over to the speakers and chat a little bit about what are the origin stories of your journeys to feeling good. So for Justin specifically, was there a catalyst moment in your life when you realized that you needed these methods of feeling good? And if so, are you able to share what some of these methods are?
Sure, yeah. So thanks for having me. Love talking about this. Really the catalyst for some of this stuff came a couple years ago. You know, I spent my whole career, I've been an entrepreneur and investor in Silicon Valley for the last 15 years. And that's my entire adult life. Like right after we graduated from school, I kind of dove in and started a company. And the whole time I was really stressed. The whole time I was really, really stressed about what was happening. And I was always, startups are a roller coaster ride. There's ups, there's downs. There's a lot of like pain that people don't see. And I would always be feeling, however, the external circumstances of my situation were telling me to feel. So if things seemed like they were going well, I'd feel great. If things seemed like they were going bad or the world was falling apart, which happened almost every week, I'd feel awful. And what's weird is that even though we were more successful than my wildest dreams, we over this 8-year journey, we actually built this crazy idea into like a real company, turns out, and we sold it for a lot of money, like way more than I ever thought we could be successful. Like the feeling of this roller coaster and feeling bad a lot of the time persisted, like well throughout, being acquired and then beyond. And so afterwards, I was an entrepreneur. I was still founding companies. I was investing in companies, and I would just feel, there was so much time where I'd be like, man, I just like don't feel good about what's going on. And so it kind of came to a head a couple of years ago, starting this new company, and it was just as stressed as ever. We'd hired a lot of people, and things didn't seem like they were going well, and I felt horrible every day. It was like it was just filled with anxiety, and I was like, why did I do this? How did I put myself in this position? And kind of conceptually, I was like, that's weird, because even if this doesn't work, I'm going to be fine. I kind of know that. I've been through this journey before, but I didn't feel that way. And so I started looking for any sort of salvation possible. And long story short, that's how I kind of discovered a lot of the things that I've been doing. Some of those things, meditation, started just meditating with the apps like Headspace. And now, I've been meditating every day for almost 2 years now. Fitness and exercise and then diet have been really important to me, and a couple plant medicine journeys actually as well were the things that catalyzed a lot of this change for me. So
that's really interesting. I definitely want to hop back into that in a little bit as well, but also want to hear a little bit from Jewel about your own journey. I know you had a very, very rough childhood, and I'm curious if there was a particular moment in time when you realized that you didn't have to be a victim to whatever was going on around you, but that you could choose to respond from a different perspective?
I grew up in Alaska. My parents were musicians. My mom left when I was 8, and my dad and I became a duet at that age. And so we started bar singing. So I saw a lot of people dealing with pain with drugs and alcohol at a really young age. And I was in pain because A, having your mom leave is really emotionally painful, but B, my dad had a lot of PTSD. And after the divorce, raising me and my 2 brothers was getting very triggered. Didn't know those words. Didn't know the words PTSD or the words medicating, but we were experiencing all of those things. My dad turned to drinking. He started becoming physically abusive, emotionally abusive. And so I was in pain in bar rooms watching people in pain. And it was a privilege in a way because I saw people use drugs, alcohol, rage, sex, relationships to try and cover up their pain, but it turned into a mountain. And I watched these people kill themselves. I sang in these bars for years. So I made a promise to myself to try and figure out what to do with pain. And I found it very weird that we're not taught, because all of us have pain. Nobody gets out of life without pain. Why aren't we taught about it? And that really bothered me. I ended up moving out when I was really young, when I was 15, and I knew statistically kids like me end up repeating the cycle. I knew statistically I should end up on drugs or in an abusive relationship, and I didn't want to be a statistic. But I had this problem, this idea of nature versus nurture. I was reading a lot of philosophy at the time, and I was like, if my nurture was really bad, will I ever get to know my nature, or am I just screwed? And so I set off on this kind of ambitious mission at 15 to learn a new emotional language because I knew I had to. I just knew the odds were incredibly against me. I knew I was in a dangerous situation with the amount of emotional trauma that I had moving out at 15. It's not a recipe for success typically. And I did pretty well with it. I'd watch other people, I'd watch their behaviors, I took notes, because the emotional language that I was taught in my house, right, wasn't a good one. So I did pretty good, and then flash forward, I was living in San Diego taking care of my mom who was sick, and I was working in jobs, dead-end jobs. My boss propositioned me, and when I wouldn't have sex, wouldn't give me my paycheck, couldn't pay my rent, started living in my car got stolen, I was having panic attacks, became agoraphobic, started shoplifting a lot, and one day I was in a dressing room, and I was trying to steal a dress that was clean and pretty and girly and new and just everything I felt like I wasn't. And I looked in that mirror of literally me trying to shove a dress down my pants. And I realized I was a statistic. That's 3 short years later. I did not beat the odds. I was a homeless kid shoplifting, and I would end up in jail or dead if I didn't change my life. And that's when I realized our anxiety is this counterintuitive, paradoxical thing. We worry and are anxious to keep ourselves safe, but it robs us of the only opportunity we have to keep ourselves safe, which is being here, making a good decision in this moment, not in relation to a moment I'm projecting into a future that hasn't happened. So for me, I think there was a lot of little moments leading up to it, but that's the one that really sticks out.
That was really fascinating and really, really interesting to hear about how you were able to deal with your anxiety in that way. I also want to turn the discussion to the topic of authenticity. And we all know, for example, that the entertainment industry is pretty notorious for pushing artists perhaps to be more quote unquote commercially successful at the risk of not being authentic to their true selves. And I would love to open this for both you and Justin to answer this, because I know Justin, as an entrepreneur who has raised a lot of funding from investors, there's also a lot of pressure in that regard as well. And you also wrote an article about how you became more authentic over time. So we'd love to have you to delve into this topic a bit more.
I think I was in a unique position because while I was homeless, I started learning how to be happy despite my circumstances, maybe because of it. And I learned that telling the truth made me feel connected to other humans, and I needed it. I was starving for it. And when I almost got, there was a big bidding war over me when I was homeless. I was actually offered $1 million signing bonus as a homeless kid. And I turned it down because I realized it was a loan. And it meant that my art had to earn back $1 million for my label before they ever profited. And the odds of me getting dropped, because there was this huge cash bounty on my head, were probably really high. And if I wanted to protect my art, which to me meant protecting my honesty, I made an honest folk record that was not very commercial. It meant I had to protect it like a parent would. I knew the value of the happiness I had fought for, and I didn't want to give it up. I didn't want to be more famous than I wanted to be happy. And so I almost didn't sign the record deal, as odd as that sounds. I was really afraid because, again, I knew somebody with my emotional background, if you add the immense pressures of the amount of success that somebody like Justin's achieved or I've achieved, it's kind of a recipe for disaster because all of your insecurities and your poor self-care, all of those things just, there's fuel that's added to it. And my job, we've seen it work out stereotypically over and over with deaths and suicides and overdoses and shaved heads and mental illness. So for me, I made a promise to myself that my number one job in life is to be a happy person, period. That's my number one job. That's success. Now, happiness is a side effect, right, of decisions, but my number one job was to be a happy, whole human and figure out how to be healthy. And then my number two job was to be a musician. And knowing that clearly, that was my directive, really helped me navigate my career because I never swapped those priorities. I never thought being popular or liked would make me happy just because of the type of background that I had. And so I was able to advocate for my wellness, I guess, is a way of saying it. But it is a lot of pressure, because in my business, there are lots of people telling you you're going to kill your career and you'll never make money again and you'll never be popular again. And there are consequences. Like you quit for 2 years, you have to build that momentum back and you have to be willing to pay that price. But I think it was really worth it. And, we live in a society that wants highly individualized everything, individualized phone covers. But we don't want to do the work of actually what it takes to listen to our heart. And that's the only way to be genuinely unique in a useful way. If we have personalized this and that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't make your life better. But if we can listen to our heart and follow that truth, that will lead you to a great life. It'll lead you on a great story. But to listen to your heart, you need to spend time alone. You need to spend time in silence. You need to spend time where you're not distracted. And you have to fight for that space in your life like it's your job.
Authenticity. I feel like in some ways I was always a very authentic person. And then in some ways, there's always been this pressure to, it's Silicon Valley, you raise a lot of money or you want to present a certain way, like you want things to be going well. And so there is this kind of veneer of like you have to be a certain person or present a certain way of like how your company's going. But I feel like I was always pretty bad at that actually. Like my natural state was always just to tell people like everything that was going on with me, like good and bad. And so I in some ways I was very authentic throughout my entire career, and even when things weren't going super well, or I wasn't very conscious of my experience. And I don't know. Something that resonated with me was I had this conversation with one of my friends a couple of months ago for this podcast I'm starting. It's Steve Huffman, the founder of Reddit, and he was saying that like what part of the ways that he interacts with the world now is he realizes he's never going to be Jeff Bezos or some other famous tech mogul. He just tries to be every day the best Steve that he can be, the best Steve Huffman. And that really resonated with me because I think I've always tried to just do what I want to do in the best, most authentic way to me and be really open about it. And I think somewhere early on in my childhood or my development, I realized that was who I was. Like I was an open person, and that's the thing that resonated about me with other people. And so I just like started doing more and more of that. And so, oftentimes like it's this article that I wrote about feeling good that you like, Fang. It's like people give me a lot of praise for that. They're like, oh wow, that's like so vulnerable and honest. But it, to me, it's something I've kind of always loved to do because that was the way that I feel like I attracted people to me and connected with other people. I'd always been looking for that connection with others, and I think being authentic was the way that I got it in my life. So
that makes me think of a quote. I'm trying to think of who said it. It was I think it was a writer, and it was his advice to young artists, and it said, notice and pay very close attention to what the critics hate about you and do more of it, because it's probably what's most unique about you. And I loved that. It reminded me a lot of what you were saying. And I love that you're saying that's how you connect with people. You know, it really is, that human connection is so invaluable. It really is the best type of currency. And I think telling people the truth, like in my fan base, being able to be honest about, I'm not doing great, or I have these huge flaws and I'm not a perfect person, gave me a lot of freedom. So I didn't feel like I had to uphold some perfect pop image. And I'm always struck, you know, whenever I hear entrepreneurs talk, and you talk, Justin, just how similar entrepreneurs and, you know, artists and writers are. It's sort of this like, you have the unknown in front of you and you're trying to forge a way forward that's relevant to culture. And I just love hearing you talk.
Yeah, thank you. I think that art and entrepreneurship is really similar. You have this, you know, you're trying to bring some vision to life, and it's coming out there by your will alone, and you're really pushing forward. And there's this deep uncertainty. I think for so many entrepreneurs and I think artists that I've met, it's like there's this bravery where you have this vision of the future and you're willing to put your name out there to like make it happen. But you also have this deep anxiety that often drives, like so many of my friends who are entrepreneurs of this like really they have something to prove. You know, they want to make it, and there's this like anxiety that fuels them. That was the case for me. It's really do or die. They feel like it's the end of the world if they don't make it, and that serves you to a certain point. And in my journey, that I think served me really well, because it made me do something crazy and then turn that into something that actually really worked commercially. But then at a certain point, maybe it no longer serves you. And you know, for me, it was this. I was in this loop for years after we were successful, living the same kind of insecurities, and only finally realized like, oh, maybe I can do something different. I could choose a different path.
Yeah, I think that's such an important transition. You know, a lot of artists feel that as well. They feel deficient in some way and they want to prove that they're capable. And that chip on your shoulder can be very motivating, but then it becomes very limiting, because your art is always going to be relative to an insecurity, and it's never really a place of power. And learning how to switch that off, I also liken it to perfectionism. You know, perfectionism got me so far because I wanted to be the best, the best, the best, the best. And it was kind of like this rocket booster. But to be truly great, to be brilliant at something, it takes such risk. And perfectionism doesn't allow risk. It allows very calculated risk. It can look like risk to other people, but it's calculated. You know, it's meticulous. And it isn't that courageous because it never wants to look stupid. And it starts to be this real prison. And when I realized, oh my gosh, I have to let go of my perfectionism, have no plan, let go of this chip on my shoulder to get that extra inch. You know, it got me up the mountain, but that inch to the summit of true originality takes no perfectionism. It takes tremendous courage. It takes not being in relationship to our insecurities. It takes that soul searching of understanding what your power and your gift is that's unique. And it's quite a process.
I would love to hear more about how you're both giving back to your communities in terms of your learnings. I know, you know, Justin, you've set up a Telegram app group for people who have read the article. I know, Jill, you've been so involved with the Everyday, you know, Angels, as well as the Never Broken community. And what last advice do you have for people out there who, you know, really need ways of feeling good right now?
Yeah, for me, well, wellness, and particularly the intersection of like how do you get people started with motivation and wellness is really interesting. You know, I spent my whole career building things that were, I guess, addictive in some ways, or use technology to like entertain people. Um, and it was always to like make something big, right? And make something creative, but there was a little bit more of a selfish interest in that. And in that, I was like, okay, let's just make a really big website and then it'll be worth a lot of money or something. And now, you know, one of my primary interests is like, how do you use some of those skills that I learned to like create, to change people's motivation and help them along a path where they might have more fulfillment and happiness in their life in a, you know, daily way. And so one of the things I've been doing is creating an app. Of course, that's like my I guess that's what I know. And so trying to create an app. It's called Kin. It's like a habit tracker, habit formation, like a social habit formation app to help people form healthy habits in their lives, because there were a lot of, you know, small pieces of technology that really helped me and, you know, create these positive habit loops. So that's kind of one big thing. And then the other thing is for me is just really being authentic about my experience, of like saying, hey, I struggled a lot. It was kind of orthogonal to success. Like I struggled even after being successful. That was very surprising to me. I still struggle, but here are some of the things that helped me. And I didn't invent any of them. I only learned them from other people who were kind enough or motivated enough to say, hey, Justin, here's something that like really worked for me, and I want to tell you about it. And so if I can do that for anyone else out there, I think that's like a fulfilling completion of that loop.
Yeah, I really think that, I guess I would have to start with an act of power. What is an act of power? I think we live in a culture that's so obsessed with power and building power, but I think it's in a very disempowered way. To me, an act of power is something that benefits you, and it also benefits your community. And it's the circle that keeps feeding you and keeps feeding the community, which keeps feeding you. And it starts to build a momentum. For me, I took this sort of toolkit that I developed for myself when I was homeless, and then, I had to create a whole new set of tools when I was famous, and then what happened after. Because my real passion is, how do you help people that don't have access to traditional resources, traditional therapy, even family units? So much of my life was spent alone. And then empowering and seeing if kids can do that. So I started a foundation called Inspiring Children. It was founded about 18 years ago, where I work with suicidal youth that don't have access to any other tools, and we teach them entrepreneurial skills and mindfulness skills. And 99% of our kids earned their own college scholarships this year, and 90% of them were Ivy League level, which is just a side effect. It sounds flashy, and it is an amazing stat, but it's because it's a side effect of how these kids have learned to convert their pain and make it this rocket fuel for good, with peace and peaceful minds. And then creating that into a digital toolkit, which I need to talk to Justin about, because that's not my forte, but creating practicable, doable steps, because mindfulness is important. Mindfulness is just conscious presence, right? You can't change your life if you're not consciously present. Meditation is like a bicep curl. It helps you build the ability and the endurance to be present for longer and longer periods of time. But if that's where it stops, I can tell you just out of personal experience, there were lots of times I'd meditate and be like, I'm so evolved. And then I'd walk out the door and something would piss me off and I'd be right back to my unevolved state. So if you can't figure out how to put that muscle, right, that ability to be present to work, your life won't change. And my passion, besides writing songs, has been making practicable exercises. And so I created Jewel Never Broken, which has a lot of these, exercises that I made up. They were proven to work by a neuroscientist, which was really trippy and really cool, because I want to be able to scale that as much as we can, because not everybody can get to therapy. It feels good to talk, but they're not getting those results of like, my life is better. I'm making better decisions. I'm in better relationships. And if we're not getting that level of change out of it, we have to keep searching for something else.
I love that. We should talk about it. I think building something that's scalable is super interesting, that provides access to, everybody out there has this computer in their pocket that they can use that can help train them or teach them. And how, the question to me is just, how do you get that out there in the best way possible?
Yeah, because again, learning to meditate is so important, but then we need like practicable things to change our habits and to rewire those habit loops. And if we look at the pandemic, it is this threefold thing. It's the virus, it's the economic fallout, and then it's the mental health. 1 in 4 kids right now are contemplating suicide. That's an unacceptable number. Suicide's gone up 60% since 2006. So that was a pre-COVID number. So we're in a crisis. It was a crisis before COVID, and I really think we have to find solutions to help create doable interventions, because pain is a great place to change. When you asked about how do you help people on a wellness journey, I hate saying it, but look for people in pain, because they're willing to try something new, because we feel desperate. It's what helped me change my life.
They've said that suffering is sometimes the best thing, because through suffering, you need to find ways out of that. And that's a big motivator. And I think that seems true also from both your perspectives as well. And I know it's also been true for myself as well. So I want to thank both speakers so much for giving your time, being so authentic about your own stories. And I'm really hoping that this will be helpful for other folks out there, maybe who are going through some tough times. to be able to look within themselves as well for that wisdom from which to proceed. So thank you